Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive on ancient India, its history, its religion, its culture, and we'll be using Upinder Singh's book, The Idea of Ancient India, as our guide. Don't worry, this isn't like one of those super dry textbooks or anything.
Yeah. You know what I think is so cool about this book is how Singh manages to weave together all this stuff from
Mhm.
inscriptions and archaeology and even art history.
Yeah.
It's what gives us, I think, such a rich and nuanced picture of what ancient India was really like.
Definitely, yeah. And I think one of the first things that really struck me was how the book emphasizes the importance of place. You know what I mean? Like the actual physical places
Right.
in understanding the past. So, like, we start our journey in Sanchi, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site that's famous for those amazing Buddhist monuments. But what's really cool is that all these inscriptions they found there actually tell us a ton about the people who supported building them way back when.
Oh, yeah. Those inscriptions are amazing. They really are like this gold mine of information about everyday life. They tell us about the donors, their families, what they did for a living, where they came from, even their social standing. It's really like looking through this window into the past.
You're not going to believe this, but there's even details about women donors, which kind of blows that whole idea out of the water. That women were just passive in these ancient societies. It seems like they had some serious economic power and trutakati. They were very active in religious life. And get this, there are even Yavana donors mentioned at Sanchi. Yavana means Greek, by the way.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's right. It just goes to show you how connected ancient India was to the rest of the world. It's a good reminder that ancient civilizations weren't really isolated. They were constantly interacting and influencing each other.
Totally. So from there, our journey takes us south to Nagarjunakonda, which is another super important Buddhist site. But it wasn't just a religious center, it was also the capital of the Ikshvaku dynasty, which really shows how closely religion and politics were tied together in ancient India.
Oh, absolutely. Nagarjunakonda is like the perfect example of how power and faith kind of went hand in hand. Although, there's still some debate about the exact dates for the site's history, which just goes to show you how our understanding of the past is always changing as new evidence is uncovered.
Yeah, it's like a giant historical puzzle, with every new piece changing the picture a little bit. Speaking of different perspectives, the book then takes us to Mathura, which a lot of people associate with the god Krishna. But Singh points out that Mathura was actually like this melting pot where a bunch of different religious traditions all kind of flourish together.
Yeah, Mathura wasn't just about Krishna. The book highlights how important Yakshas and Yakshis were early on. Those are like these nature spirits that actually predate the more well-known Hindu deities. And there's evidence of a pretty cool shift in religious practices over time. Like, at first, the focus was on these huge public images. But then later you see this transition to smaller, more like domestic shrines.
That is fascinating. It's almost like religion became more personal over time, moving from these big public displays to something more intimate in the home. And the coolest part is there's actual physical proof of this coexistence between different religious practices. Like there's this inscription from the Dadkarna shrine that just shows it so clearly.
Right. That inscription is just like a powerful reminder that religious boundaries in ancient India weren't nearly as strict as we might think. People would worship a whole bunch of different gods and participate in different traditions all at the same time. It wasn't about being totally devoted to one specific belief system or anything like that.
And of course, we can't forget about how diverse ancient India was in general, like geographically, I mean. The book also talks about the stuff they found in Orissa, which gives us this glimpse into how different parts of ancient India developed in their own unique ways, with their own political structures and systems of patronage, and even their own social hierarchies.
Yeah, the inscriptions from Orissa are super interesting,
Yeah.
especially because they show just how important the Brahmanas were in society. The Brahmanas were the priests, and their influence went way beyond just religious matters. They were advisors and scholars and even landowners. They had a ton of power and authority.
So basically what we're seeing here is that ancient India was way more complex and multifaceted than we might have imagined. It wasn't this like monolithic thing,
Yeah.
but rather this vibrant tapestry of all these interconnected stories and cultures.
Exactly. And as we dive deeper into all of this, we're going to explore how archaeology has shaped our understanding of this really rich and complex past. We'll even meet some of the pioneers who uncovered these incredible sites and learn about the debates that their discoveries sparked.
I'm excited.
Me too.
It's easy to think of archaeology as kind of this, dry academic thing, but this book really brings out the human side of it all. Like, take Alexander Cunningham, for example. He was like a total pioneer in Indian archaeology.
Oh, yeah, I love Cunningham's story.
Yeah.
He was such an adventurer.
Like, get this. He actually used the writings of Chinese Buddhist pilgrims to help him find all these lost Buddhist sites.
It's amazing how he was able to put all those pieces together.
And one of his most famous excavations was at Barhut, where he like super carefully documented all these incredible sculptures and then worked to figure out what they all meant.
Barhut is just an incredible site. So much early Buddhist art there.
Yeah, and Cunningham didn't just do it all by himself. He worked with all these scholars and even a Sri Lankan Buddhist priest to help him understand the stories behind all the carvings. It's really cool to see how all these different people from different cultures and backgrounds came together to try and understand the past.
It's like a great example of collaboration.
But the book also points out that there was a lot of disagreement within archaeology, too. Like, Cunningham often butted heads with architectural scholars, like James Ferguson, who were more focused on style than historical context.
Yeah, it's like they were working on the same puzzle, but looking at completely different pieces.
Exactly, and a great example of this is the Amaravati Stupa, which has this whole complicated history, with colonial excavations and artifacts being shipped off to museums all over the world, and all the issues around conservation policies.
It raises all kinds of important questions, like who gets to tell the story of the past, and where should these artifacts be kept?
Right, these are still such relevant issues today. And speaking of today, the book doesn't just stop at ancient times. It also talks about how Buddhism was kind of revived and changed in modern India.
It's a good reminder that religion isn't static. You know, it's always evolving and adapting.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that Buddhism actually went through a period of decline in India around the early medieval period. But then you have figures like B.R. Ambedkar, who led the Dalit Buddhist movement.
Ambedkar was such a key figure.
Yeah, he totally reinterpreted Buddhism and made it relevant to people who were marginalized. His message about social justice and equality really resonated. And a lot of people ended up converting to Buddhism because of him.
And at the same time, you also have Tibetan Buddhism arriving in India.
Right, with the Dalai Lama being exiled and all. And Tibetan Buddhist communities springing up all over India.
It's interesting, though, because even though they share the same faith, there hasn't been that much interaction between Dalit and Tibetan Buddhists.
Yeah, it's almost like they're operating in two totally separate worlds, each with their own cultural and political influences.
It makes you think about how religion intersects with identity and social dynamics.
Definitely. And to kind of bring things full circle, the book wraps up by looking at how these ancient Buddhist sites are interacting with the modern world.
Yeah, they're not just relics of the past. They're very much part of the present.
You know, the rise of spiritual tourism and governments trying to promote them, and even other Asian countries getting involved in conservation efforts.
Like the Indian government sees spiritual tourism as this big potential source of income and a way to promote cultural exchange.
And it's not just India. East Asian countries, especially Japan, have been super active in preserving Buddhist sites in India.
Yeah, it really highlights the lasting impact of Buddhism across Asia. A great example of this is the Burmese involvement in restoring the Mahabodhi temple at Bodh Gaya. And you can even see examples of shared practices like footprint worship, which is common in both Burma and India.
Footprint worship, what's that?
It's basically venerating the footprints of the Buddha. They're often depicted in art or enshrined in temples. They symbolize the Buddha's presence and his teachings.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's amazing how something as simple as a footprint can be so meaningful and inspire devotion for centuries. Yeah, it really shows how connected ancient India was to the rest of the world, not just some isolated place. Like, those connections are still visible today, you know? It's incredible how long-lasting the impact of those exchanges has been.
You know, it's like the book really challenges us to think differently about the past, to look beyond those simple narratives and really embrace all the different voices and perspectives that make history so fascinating.
Honestly, I'm just blown away by how rich and complex ancient India really was. It's so much more than just, a boring chapter in a history book.
It's like a giant tapestry, right?
Yeah.
With all these threads of religion and empires and art and human stories woven together over centuries.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
That's what's so cool about history. There's always more to discover. And Singh's book is a good reminder that the way we understand the past is always changing.
Yeah.
You know, new discoveries are constantly reshaping how we view ancient India.
If anyone's listening and they're intrigued by all this, I highly recommend checking out The Idea of Ancient India. It's such an engaging read. You'll come away with a whole new appreciation for this amazing civilization.
As you learn more about ancient India, I want you to think about this. What aspects of ancient Indian culture, philosophy, or art really resonate with you today?
Hmm, that's a great question.